All right, we'll say good morning, a good Erev Shabbos. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Menachem Av, the Tilson and Wall families, sending their love from Eretz Yisrael and inviting us, Meretz Hashem, all of us, to join them Bekarov. Our week of learning sponsors, Ingrid Fishman and Lynn Caesar, in memory of their mother, Charlotte Gavantman, and sister Judith Gavantman, Zichron Levrach, on their yard sites. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in Nechama. We dedicate our learning in Meretz Hashem in the schus of the speedy return of our hostages and in the schus of the success of our soldiers, B'chol Ma'aseh Yadehem, their hostages and our soldiers, Bizocha, to be returned to their families, to be returned to the land of Meretz Hashem, B'Shalom and B'Karov. But with that, let us begin. A lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, a really exciting daf ahead of us. Today's daf is Mem Hey 45, and we are picking up on Mem Dalet Mebez 44. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem on 44b. We are picking up in Meretz Hashem. We left off. Let's actually pick up from V'ha'amar Papa. I think that's just the easiest place to pick up. We got a little bit further than that, but let's choose 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 lines up from the bottom. So again, just to reorient ourselves a little bit with the, 1 second, I'm sorry. Okay. So just to reorient ourselves a little bit with the case that we were discussing. So the Gemara says, so remember again, V'amar Papa, so Papa says as follows. V'amar Papa. Okay, fine. Good. So remember again, let's just quickly, we had two different cases, right? Two different cases of, number one, Hamocher Sadeh Lechaver Shelo B'Achrayis, Ein Meid Lo Alavim V'Shma Amido B'Fnei Ba'Chova. So I'm sorry. We had, yeah, good. Let's just pick up. Papa said as follows. Let's jump into it. So remember again, we learned, even though Papa said that in general, when you sell land to someone and you sell them the land without achrayis, right, without a guarantee, then remember again, what's the whole idea of selling something without a guarantee? Is that there's no recourse. So I sell someone a field without achrayis, and then my creditor comes and seizes that field. Ultimately, again, the purchaser has no recourse against me. So the Gemara says, Nimtzeis she'eno shelo chozer alav. But interestingly enough, halacha l'maisa, if let's say it turns out that I sell Reuven a field, and the field was never mine, in that case, Reuven does have recourse against me. So you hear this distinction? If I legitimately sell someone a field, and then my creditor comes and seizes that field, then Reuven has no recourse against me at the end of the day because I sold it shelo ba'achrayis. However, if halacha l'maisa, I go ahead and sell Reuven a field that was never my field to sell to begin with, then halacha l'maisa again, so a fraudulent sale, then halacha l'maisa, he does have recourse against me. But the Gemara says, I'm asking him, but over here, what is the case that we're dealing with? Now, this is a case where even though now the ownership is contested, the purchaser knows that this was my animal. So literally translated, that there's a recognition that this is the daughter of my chamor, of my donkey. In other words, we'll say that's, I don't know how, I guess, they look like each other. I don't know exactly how you know that piece of information, but Lamaisa, it is clear that halacha Lamaisa, this animal does belong to the seller. Rav Zvid said, Afilu nimtzeis she'eno shelo, eno chozra alav. Rav Zvid disagrees with his previous statement. Rabbi said, this is how we passing halacha Lamaisa. Rav Zvid said, even if it turns out that I sell something to someone and it's not mine, it's not mine. The object does not belong to me. So I sold something that does not belong to me. The purchaser still does not have any level of recourse. Why not? This is interesting because I can say back to the purchaser, hey, this is why I sold it to you without achrayis. There are two reasons apparently why people sell real property or movable property without a guarantee. Number one, it's because they know that maybe it's mortgaged. And number two, the other possibility is because they know that it doesn't belong to them, right? And therefore, again, they're uninterested. I will say, again, remember, in halacha, we absolutely create a heightened level of buyer protection. But at the end of the day, buyer protection is no substitute for due diligence. This is an incredibly important idea, both in halacha and hashkafa. The halacha still demands a heightened level of vigilance on the part of the purchaser, right? At the end of the day, the system will do whatever it can to go ahead and take care of you, but you also have to look out for yourself. So again, if you're buying something without a guarantee, that's a risk you're taking. And understand, whether it's because it's encumbered or whether it's because it's stolen, you're going to have to bear that risk if you do not do your due diligence. A tremendous hashkafa in life as well. Other people could only help you so much. At the end of the day, the buck of your life stops with you. This is exactly what we learned in the Chassidus Chabura last night. Last night, the entire Chabura, the Piagesha's entire lesson in section Chaf was this one phrase, Adon ani la'atzmi. I am in charge of myself. I'm in charge of myself. And it's so important because so often in life when things don't materialize the way that we thought they would, we look for different people to blame. And other people may have a contributing role into my failures in life. But at the end of the day, I'm responsible for me. In halacha, you have to do your due diligence, and in hashkafa, you have to do your due diligence. In halacha, there's a system that's meant to protect the purchaser, but the purchaser still has to do his own part. And in hashkafa, there are other people and other circumstances, other frameworks that can help me. But at the end of the day, I have to be responsible for me. Good. The Gemara goes weiter. Gufa. So let's go back and revisit one of the things we mentioned before. Gufa. Amar Rabbi Shmuel Silber. Hamochas ad lechaver shel b'achrayus ein meid lo aleh mipnei shamida mipnei ba'chovos. So we've had now this concept for the last 3 days. So Rabbi Shmuel says in the name of Shmuel, if I sell a field to Ruvain without achrayus. So remember again now how exactly this case, and so what's the halacha? The halacha is let's say now Ruvain's ownership is contested, and now Ruvain says, Silber, come to Beis Din, testify on my behalf that you sold it to me. I am not allowed to testify on behalf of Ruvain. Why not? So remember we had a machlokes Ravina and Rav Sheshes about how exactly to go ahead and read this particular section. But let's just read it now, just at face value, right? What I have over here is as follows. I sell a field to Ruvain. Now Ruvain's ownership is contested. Ruvain says, Silber, can you please come to Beis Din and testify on my behalf that you sold it to me, solidifying my ownership. What is the halacha? What does Rabbi Shmuel say? I, the seller, am not permitted to come to Beis Din. I can come to Beis Din. I can't testify on Ruvain's behalf. Why not? Because I have a vested interest in this field remaining Ruvain's. What's my vested interest? If I have a creditor, right, if this is encumbered property, then it's in my best interest that it remain with Ruvain. Why? Because this way, again, halacha l'maisa, my creditor could seize it in satisfaction of the debt. So because of that, I am not permitted to testify on behalf of Ruvain. The Gemara says, can we just talk about this case for just a second? Hechidami. What is the case? Top of Memhei, 45a. Idi isle ara achrisi ale didei hadar. So mimanav shach. If I have other land, right? So again, let's play this out. I sold the land to Ruvain. Right? So now it turns out I borrowed money from Shimon. Right? So I borrowed $10,000 from Shimon. So that means Shimon has a lien against my property. So now what we're saying is like this. If someone challenges Ruvain's ownership of the land, and Ruvain says, Silber, come to Beis Din and testify on my behalf that you sold me the land and solidifying my title to this. The Gemara says, no, Rabbi Shmuel says, can't do it. I'm not allowed to testify on behalf of Ruvain. Why? Because I'm an ogeh b'davar. I have a vested interest that this property remain with Ruvain in order to be able to satisfy my debt to Shimon. So the Gemara says, I don't understand what's going on over here. At the end of the day, if I have other land, right? If I have other land, right, then where is Shimon going to collect his debt from? Where is he going to collect it from? That other land. So remember again, when do you go after encumbered, sold land? When do you go after that? That's when there's nothing else to collect from. That's the last bucket of collection to claw back sold properties. So if I have other properties in my possession, then Shimon, my creditor, is going to go ahead and seek repayment from that. Either Leslie Ara Achrisa, and if I don't have any other land, the Gemara says, my nafka lemine, then the truth is, what do I care if Reuven owns it, or if Levi owns it, or someone else owns it? In other words, if I have land, Shimon, my creditor, is going to collect it from other places. If I don't have land, then the truth is, what does it matter to me if Reuven has the land, if Levi has the land, if Yehuda has the land? In other words, why can't I testify on behalf of Reuven? In other words, if I don't have any other property, Shimon, my creditor, is going to go ahead and get my property from somewhere else. He's going to get it from somewhere else. So what does it matter to me at the end of the day who owns it? The Gemara says, Li'olam, the less they are achri. So the truth is, dealing with a case where I have no other land, and therefore, again, Shimon, my creditor, is going to come to collect from this sold property. So what's the problem over here? Da'amar lonecha delehavi lo verasha v'lo yishalim. So we'll say, so why is it? So now watch this. So the Gemara says, I have no other land. Right? So I borrowed $10,000 from Shimon. Right? That's part one of the story. Okay. Part two of the story is I did have a parcel of land, which was of course encumbered by a loan, and I sold it to Reuven. Right? I sold it to Reuven. So now so that's part two of the story. Part three of the story is that now, again, I have, that was my only parcel of land. Part three of the story, someone is contesting Reuven's ownership of the land, and Reuven asks me to testify on his behalf in Beis Din. So now the Gemara says, I am not allowed to do so. Why? I'm an ogeh b'davar. Right? I have a vested interest in this testimony, and therefore I'm not impartial. The Gemara says, but why? In other words, I have no money. So now Shimon's going to have to claw back that land from Reuven. So what does it matter to me if he claws it back from Reuven or if he claws it back from Yehuda? Who cares? To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you why. I still have a vested interest in that property remaining with Reuven because that's going to be easier for Shimon to collect it from Reuven than from someone else. And I don't want to be known as a guy who doesn't repay his debts. In other words, that I have a vested interest in making sure that Shimon, my creditor, gets paid, because if not, I get the title that David HaMelech says until a lo verasha v'lo yishalim. An evil borrower is one who does not repay. So therefore, I do have a vested interest in this edus because I want to make sure that Shimon, my creditor, gets repaid. Okay, the Gemara says, that's nice. Here's the problem. Sof lagabe idach nami lo verasha v'lo yishalimhu. So again, that's fine. You're going to make sure that Shimon gets repaid. Rabbi say, but who is going to be kind of left out over here, right? Reuven. Reuven is the guy you sold the property to, right? So now it's very nice that your creditor got repaid, but you're still going to be called an evil guy vis-a-vis the purchaser, right? Vis-a-vis Reuven. To which the Gemara says, no. I have an answer. Somehow it's my answer. Again, it's not like a nice answer, but it is a legitimate answer. Say, Reuven, I'm sorry that you're braggis, but at the end of the day, that's why I sold you without achrayas. Again, I was, in general, whenever someone sells you property without a guarantee, that always raises an eyebrow, right? Like there are certain things, buying property sight unseen, right? Buying property again without an inspection, right? There are certain things that raise your antenna that like something may be going on over here. Maybe yes, maybe no. But again, certainly when someone sells you property without achrayas, that always means one thing. And what does it mean? It means that it's encumbered. It means that there's a lien against it. And by the way, that's not a bad thing. That's not fraudulent. It's just saying, by the way, there might be other stuff going on with this property, and I don't want you coming back to me. That's all it means. So therefore, the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, if I say back to Reuven, you can't be braggis with me because I sold it to you without achrayas. Okay, and I will say, by the way, what's the benefit of buying something without a guarantee, without achrayas? The benefit, it'll generally be cheaper, right? Which makes sense. In other words, you are getting something for that lack of guarantee. You're getting a reduction in price. The Gemara says, Bepashas, we would assume that's the way it works. Machar is Rava v'tim Rapapa. So let's listen to this. So Rava announced, and some say, I don't know what's happening over here. Okay, so Machriz Rava v'tim Rav Papa. So Rava announced, and some say it was Rav Papa. and some say it was Rav Papa. The Salkin le'ila udinachtin letasa. So let's listen to this. So Rava announced, and so it was Rav Papa who announced, the Salkin le'ila, those who are going from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Right, that's the lashon of going up. Those who are going from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael, or dinachtin letasa, or those who are going from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. And they said the following message. Hi Bari Yisrael. This is a fascinating case. If you have a Jew who sold a donkey to his fellow Jew, okay, and a non-Jew, an akum, an idolater comes along, and the idolater seizes it from the Jew. So, for example, I sell a donkey to Ruvain, okay, no problem. Right? And now what happens? An akum comes along and seizes the donkey from Ruvain. Rabbi say now. Ultimately, again, why is the akum going ahead and seizing the donkey from the Israel? The akum is claiming it's his. He's claiming it's his. Then what's the halacha? Dinahu demaftzile minei. The halacha is that I am obligated to help Ruvain to retrieve his donkey. I'm obligated to help Ruvain to retrieve his donkey. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. The Rashbam says as follows: Va'anis leminei delokech dekatan akun chamer zeh ganav mimeni o misha machur lecha gazl mimeni ubelo edim ma'anso hemenu. So the idea over here is that I sell the donkey to Ruvain, and now Akum comes over to Ruvain and seizes it from him, claiming it's his donkey. It's his donkey. Either he claims that I, Silber, stole it from him, or someone else stole it from him. The point of it is he's claiming ownership. So the halacha is, or at least Rava is, or Rav Papa is saying the halacha is that I, the seller, have an obligation to go ahead and help the purchaser reclaim his donkey. Now, what's the pshat with this? Take a look at the first wide line of the Rashbam. Behilchach, Dinahu demaftzile kimon apod says David Avdo mecherevra v'yavi edin v'yadon ima'akum ulai yotzeinu v'yado the akum tzaisi dinahem v'dafka akum aval ka'anis leYisrael lo maftzile ela yitba'enu bedin de'in koach leYisrael ligzol chamor mechavero b'lo edim b'lo raya. So we'll say, so now, watch what's happening over here. What does this mean that I'm the seller and I'm obligated to get involved with the purchaser? What we're concerned about is maybe the akum is right. Maybe the akum is right. In other words, maybe he has a legitimate claim, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, I, the seller, have a responsibility to help the purchaser get back his donkey. That's my obligation. Now, the Rashbam points out, why are we illustrating this with an akum and not with a Jew? In other words, let's do the same case. I sell a donkey to Ruvain, and Ruvain comes along and Shimon takes the donkey from Ruvain and says, Ruvain, that's my donkey. We'll say that's because when it comes to Jews, right, there's a mechanism. First of all, even if Shimon wants to make a claim that the donkey is his, Shimon has no right of seizure, right? So what does Shimon have to do? Shimon has to take Ruvain to Beis Din, and there's a process. And if Shimon were to take the donkey claiming that it was stolen from him, the first thing we would do is we would take it back from him and say, 1 second, buddy, that's not how we do things. That's not how we do things. The akum, we have less control over. So therefore, halacha l'maisa, what the Gemara is saying over here is, I sell to Ruvain, akum comes and seizes it from Ruvain, I have an obligation to help Ruvain get back his donkey. So the Gemara says, V'lo amar ela she'eno makir ba, shibas chamoro. So we'll say furthermore, when am I, the seller, obligated to help out Ruvain the purchaser? That's only when there is not definitive proof that this animal was really mine. In other words, we'll say, what's the underlying piece over here? The underlying concern over here is maybe the akum is right. Maybe I did steal it, right? Maybe it wasn't my animal. So now the Gemara just qualifies this and says, but if halacha l'maisa, we know definitively that it's my animal. How do we know definitively that it's my animal? That this donkey looks exactly like its father or its mother, right? Exactly like its mother. Right? So it's not a spitting image, right? So therefore, there's no shaila that this is my donkey. In that kind of case, then I will say clearly the akum is advancing a fraudulent claim. And if the akum is advancing a fraudulent claim, I'm not obligated to get involved. I, the seller, am obligated. In other words, I'm only obligated to help the purchaser when there is the possibility that maybe the akum is telling the truth. But if it's clear that the akum is not telling the truth, then halacha l'maisa, I have no obligation to get involved. Furthermore, v'lo amran ela delo anis le'ledidei u'le'uchba. Aval anis, I'm sorry. Aval ela delo anis ledidei ulochba. Aval anis ledidei ulochba lo. Furthermore, when am I obligated to get involved? When the akum only took the donkey and didn't take the saddle. But if he took the donkey and the saddle, I'm not obligated to get back involved. Now, what does this mean? This is actually quite interesting. See, if the akum comes along and claims that it was his donkey, right, and somebody stole it from him, and halacha l'maisa, now what? Halacha l'maisa, we say that he only took the donkey and left behind the saddle. So that actually lends some level of legitimacy to his claim. Because why? He's only taking that which he is entitled to and leaving behind the other thing. But if he comes and he claims, this is my donkey, and he takes the donkey and the saddle, like, what? Well, I don't understand, but you just said it's the donkey. Where did the saddle come from? In other words, the fact that he's claiming one thing, but taking more, lessens the legitimacy of his claim, and therefore I'm not obligated to get involved. In other words, we'll say the theme over here is, when am I, the seller, obligated to get involved in helping the purchaser reclaim the donkey that the akum took? When there's an air of legitimacy, ultimately, again, to the akum's statement. But if there is no air of legitimacy, then essentially as the seller, I say, I'm sorry. Again, you could choose, as a seller, I could choose to help but I'm not obligated to help unless, of course, again, there's that legitimacy. Incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, good. Ameimar Amar, afilu leka kol hani lo. So Ameimar says, the truth is, we don't subscribe to this entire halacha, right? Even if, afilu leka kol hani lo, even if all of the factors that you just outlined are in place, I'm still not obligated to help. So I'll say, in other words, this entire discussion, right? This entire discussion ultimately is predicated on the statement of Rava, or some say Rav Papa, and they announced it to everyone. Whether you're going from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, here's the halacha: you sell an object to another Jew, an akum comes along and takes it, claiming that it was his, that it was stolen from him. You, the seller, are obligated to go ahead and help out. And then they frame the parameters as to when you're obligated to help out. Comes along Ameimar, and Ameimar says, no, this halacha is not correct. If I sell an object to another Jew and an akum goes ahead and takes it, I'm not obligated to help out. I'm not obligated to help out. Why not? My taima made the yada the stam oved kochavim anasu. Because Rabbi say, unfortunately, a stam oved kochavim takes from the Jew. A stam oved kochavim. Others will say, yeah, you have to understand something. This is not. Sometimes you see gemaras like this, and like people like to interpret it as disparaging. It's not disparaging. When Chazal make a statement like this, this was reflective of their experiential reality. This was of their. Again, I will say we're living. Where we have these realities as well, where, before October 7th, we were so sure, right, about our place in the world. And even as Americans, we were so sure about our place in greater society. And now October 7th happens, and now, wow, so many of those preconceived notions were proven blatantly false. Right? We'll say now that colleges are ramping up, you see this again, right? Everyone thought summer will start, everything will diffuse. So now again, I'll say this story is once again going to be coming into the headlines once again about the rampant anti-Semitism that exists on college campuses. Our whole reality as to what we thought life in this country was for us has fundamentally changed. The experiential reality has changed. When Chazal make a statement like this, this is not a knock. It's not meant to be a knock. It's meant to be a reflection on their experiential reality. Sameimar says, the akum will exploit the Jew. That's the way it works. The akum will exploit the Jew. My time made the other the stam of anasu. The akum is, and the akum had the ability to do so, right? He had the upper hand. So therefore, again, the akum was going to exploit the Jew. Shneimar asher pm diversha v'yaminam yamin sheker. So Rabbi Shmuel says this whole thing is not true. If you start mandating that every single time a Jew sells another property to Jew, a piece of property to Jew, or an item to a Jew, and then an akum takes it from the Jew, that the Jew is obligated to get involved in the davar sof. You can't do that, because unfortunately that is the experiential reality for the Jew, that the akum exploits the Jew, and therefore halacha l'maisa Meimar goes out and rejects it. And we'll say that's how we paskin. Or I should say we don't paskin. We don't paskin like this statement that if a Jew I sell to Ruvain and then it's taken by an akum, that I'm obligated to get involved. I'm not obligated to get involved. I'm not. Now again, depending on what it is, maybe there's achrayas, maybe there's not achrayas, maybe Ruvei comes back to you, maybe he doesn't, but halacha l'maisa, I am not obligated to go ahead and get involved. I can get involved if I want to, but certainly not obligated to do so. Uman ein lo chazaka. All right, Abba says back to the Mishnah. Remember again, Abba say, what was our Mishnah? Our Mishnah, which was many dapim ago, we've still been in the same Mishnah, right? So the Mishnah spoke about this idea that people, actually not so many ago, that people who the ability to establish a chazaka is when you have an object or when you are in property and there's no reason for you to be there other than the fact that you're the owner. But if there is some other legitimate reason for you to have an object or for you to be in a piece of property, then you can't establish chazaka. So for example, a craftsman, right? I go ahead and I give my car over to the mechanic to go ahead and be fixed. And he's a little bit backlogged, so it's been there for 3 years, right? So now what happens? I work locally, so not a big deal, right? So now what happens? He can't claim ownership. Why not? Because actually that's probably not a good idea, because if the mechanic does have your car for 3 years, but you understand the concept. If the uman has the object, l'maisa, again, there's a legitimate reason why he has that object, which is why I gave it to him to work on. So therefore, he can't claim chazaka. The same way the sharecropper can't go ahead and claim chazaka on a field, because there's a reason why. Yeah, of course you've been there for 3 years. I hired you. You're my worker. So the Maisi can't assert chazaka. So the Gemara says as follows: Amar Rabba, lo shanu ela shemasar lo be'edim. Now, so this is very interesting. When is the uman? When is the craftsman unable to establish chazaka on my object? When I handed it over to him with edim. Right, so I gave over the object with witnesses, so witnesses see that halacha l'maisa, again, I'm giving it to the craftsman to work on it. Aval masar lo shelo be'edim, mitoch shiyachol lomar lo hayu dvar me'olam, ki amar le nami lekucha hi biyadi mehemen. So I'll say this is incredible. So Rabbi says like this: when do we say that a uman can't establish a chazaka? That's when I gave it over to him with edim. I gave it with witnesses, so witnesses saw that I gave it to him to work on it. He can't establish chazaka. But I will say, but watch this. If I give over the object to the uman, and I give it without edim, and now, bless you, and now sometime later on, now the uman is claiming that he is the owner of the object, he's believed. Why is he believed? He has a migo. What's his migo? The migo is he could have said, I don't know what you're talking about. You never gave me any object at all. Right? He could claim he never received the object from me. He obviously is lying, but he could have claimed that. And again, I have really no recourse against that because there's no edus. So because he could have claimed that he never received the object from me, right? And therefore that would have squarely put the object in his possession. He is believed to say, I am the owner of this now. I have a chazaka of it. Abaye says, no. Ihachi afilu be'edim. So Abaye says, Rabbi, here's the hole in your logic. If you have that migo, then the truth is, even if halacha l'maisa, so I gave it to the uman with edim, mitoch shiyachol lomar lo hechzartiv lecha ki amar li lekucha hi biyadi mehemen. So I will say, even with edim, there's still a migo. What could Reuven have said? Reuven said, yeah, you gave it to me with edim, but you know what? I gave it back to you. Right? So since he could have made that claim, therefore when he makes the claim to say, I bought it from you, right? L'kucha hi biyadi, I bought it from you, he should be believed. So therefore we'll say, Abaye questions Rabba's idea. So the Gemara says, Kimberly l'kucha hi biyadi, Amrli Rabba. So Rabba says, one second. I'll explain this, I have an answer to this. Mis savris, because do you think, Rabba say, Amr Beis, mis savris, hamafkid eitzel chaveiro be'edim, Eino tzarich lahachzir lo be'edim. So the Gemara says, lo, tzachadayitcha el hamafkid eitzel chaveiro be'edim, tzarich lahachzir lo be'edim. So Rabba comes along and says, I have an answer for that. Rabba says, no. Let me finish my sentence. My sentence is, when you deposit an object with someone with witnesses, I will say, in order for the object to be returned, it has to be returned with witnesses as well. So this is very interesting. So we'll say, so Rabba's whole chap over here is, you're right. The idea over here is Rabba says the way to safeguard yourself from an uman or from ever establishing chazaka is very simple, very simple. Give the object to Ruvain with Eidim and have Ruvain return it to you with Eidim as well. That's the way this works. So Rabbi will say, so pause here for just a second. So it turns out what we have over here is a fundamental machlokus between Rabba and Abaye. Fundamental machlokus. So right, let's trace our steps. Mishnah said an uman can never establish chazaka. Right? An uman, so I deposit an object with a craftsman, right, for him to work on it. So time goes by, he claims that he's the ownership. Now remember again, I will say, what's his claim? What's his taina? His taina is he bought it from me. That's his taina, and he has possession for some amount of time. So he's claiming. So the Mishnah says it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because there's another legitimate reason as to why that object would be in his possession, namely that he's working on it for me. Okay, so now Rabba essentially comes along and says, this is only talking about a case where I gave it to him with Eidim. Right? The only way, in other words, Rabbi is saying like this, the only time that an uman can't assert ownership is when the object was given to him with Eidim. Because now there's testimony that it was given to him to work on. Now, to fill out Rabba says because the way it works is if you give it to him with Eidim, then what? The object is only considered to be returned if he returns it with Eidim as well. But if he can't produce testimony that he returned it, or there are no Eidim that he returned it, then the assumption is he still has it under the capacity as an uman. That's Rabba. Abaye says the truth is even if you go ahead and you give it to him with Eidim, he still has a migo. What's his migo? His migo is that he could say, okay, it's true, you gave it to me with Eidim, but halacha l'maisa, I gave it back to you. Now, both saying, now what is the fundamental machlokas in Abaye and Rabba? What does it really come down to? Rabba holds that when you give an object to the craftsman with eidos, it has to be returned with eidos. Abaye seems to say that even if you give it to the craftsman with eidos, he could return it without eidos. That's really the fundamental shaila that's unfolding over here. So let's analyze this. So Abaye raised the kasha, right? So Abaye is asking on Rabba, right? So Rabba holds that halacha l'maisa, the same way that the object was deposited with the craftsman with eidos, the object could only be returned with eidos as well. That's Rabba's position. That's Rabba's position. So the Gemara says, Meisve Abaye ra avdo biat uman vitaliso biat koves. So Rabbi says, now listen to this case. So the Gemara says as follows: I see my eved in the hand of an uman, right? So someone else has my eved, right? Or someone else, or the launderer has my talis, has my garment, and I say, Amrlo, mativo eslecha. Why is my eved by you? Why is my garment by you? So the Gemara says, so now what happens? So now both say the person, so let's say the launderer, let's keep with the case of the talis, right? So I'm walking down the street. I see Ruvain the launderer and he has my cloak. I say, Ruvain, why do you have my cloak? Mativo eslecha. So what does Ruvain respond? Ata machartali. So Ruvain says, no, you gave it to me. You sold it to me. Or you gave it to me as a gift. So what's the halacha? Lo amar klum. So ultimately, again, so Ruvain's statement is meaningless. And I have the right to get back my eved, to get back my cloak. Now both say, now that's just an illustration of the rule in the Mishnah. What did the Mishnah say? Uman ein lo chazaka. Right? That an uman does not have a chazaka. Okay. However, so listen to this, I will say. Now, there's an interesting twist over here in this case, which I'll have to explain. What happens now, same case, I'm walking down the street, I say Ruvain. Ruvain has my talis. I say, Ruvain, what are you doing with my talis? So I will say, so in part one of the story, Ruvain says, you sold it to me. Now I will say, so now, the halacha is, Ruvain is not believed. Ruvain is not believed. Why? Because an uman can't establish a chazaka. Now, what if instead of saying you sold it to me, he said the following? Befanai amarta lo lemochro. Now I'll say, we'll have to explain exactly how to understand this case. But let's say again, he says to me, in my presence, you told me to sell it to him. Or velitna lob matana, or to give it to him as a gift. Ultimately, again, dvarav kayamin. Ultimately, again, his words are accepted. Now, okay, so let's say, so now, what exactly that means? B'fanei amarta lo lemochro. In my presence, you told me to sell it to him or to give it to him. Such a statement is valid. Okay, so I'll say, so it's not immediately clear what that case means. So now the Gemara says, Maishna Reisha or Maishna Seifa. So okay, so we'll say, so the Reisha I understand, right? What's the Reisha case? What's the Reisha case? I'm walking down the street, I see that Reuven has my talis. I say, Reuven, why do you have my talis? Reuven says, what's Reuven's claim? You sold it to me. What's the halacha? What's the halacha? Not believed. Why? Uman ein lo chazaka. Okay, so now the Gemara says, what is that second case? What is the Seifa? Amar Rabba says, here's the Seifa. Biyotze mitachas yedei acher. Oh, okay. So both say, here's the case. The case ultimately, again, is where, right, I see my talis ultimately, again, in the hands of Shimon. So now watch this. And the other person says, B'fanai amarta lo lemochro, v'litno b'matana. Now watch this. Okay, it's a little bit of a plot twist over here. So I'm walking down the street. I see Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is the launderer, and Shimon is the guy who currently has my talis in his hand. I say, Shimon, why do you have my talis? Why do you have my talis? And Shimon says, because you told Reuven to sell it to me. Or you told Reuven to gift it to me, right? So we've got our little mezuman going on over here, right? We've got our mezuman, right? So again, Reuven the launderer, Shimon is just a guy. No Jew is just a guy, but you understand. But Shimon is in this context. Shimon is just a guy. So once more in time, I say, Shimon, why do you have my talis? And all three of us are together. So Shimon says, because you instructed Reuven to sell it to me. You instructed Reuven to gift it to me. So I'll say now what's the halacha? Now this is actually interesting. Interestingly enough, Shimon is believed. Why Shimon believed? Migo di bay amrle minach zabinte. Because also remember again, Shimon could have made a totally different claim. What's Shimon's claim? What could Shimon's claim have been? You, Silber, sold it to me. Right? Well, so in other words, Shimon, if he wanted to make things easy, he could have just made the claim that halacha l'maisa, you sold this to me. That's it, you sold it to me. Now remember again, you have to understand, from a halachic perspective, possession is 9/10 of the law, right? In other words, Shimon has the talis. The fact that Shimon has the talis, the way we construct that narrative is, if you have it, bepashtus, you're the owner. Bepashtus, you're the owner. So now I'm surprised, right? I'm saying, but you're not the owner, right? That's my talis. How did it get into your possession? So now Shimon's not weaving the story, right? But Shimon is telling the story that the way it got into my possession is that halacha l'maisa, you instructed Reuven the launderer to go ahead and give it to me. So the halacha now says Shimon is believed because he has an ego. What could he have said? He could have said, how did it get to me? Silver, you sold it to me. And the truth is, again, the burden of proof would be upon me to show that's not true. Why would the burden of proof be upon me? Why? Remember again, Shimon is in possession of it. If I want to show that Shimon is not the owner, that burden is upon me to show that Shimon is not the owner. So therefore, again, Allah in this case, Shimon is going to be believed, right? The Gemara says, Migo di boy amrle minach sabinte, because at the end of the day, Shimon could have said, I bought it from you, and therefore ki amrle befanai amarta lo lemochro dvarav kayamin umehemin. So I will say, but at the end of the day, when Shimon makes the claim that no, Silber, you went ahead and you told Reuven to sell it to me, then halacha l'maisa, Shimon is believed. Incredible. Now we'll say, now what does this have to? This is a great case. What does this have to do with our sugya? Katani mihas. We'll say, but interestingly enough, katani mihas reisha ra'a. Now we'll say, if you look at the way this brisa is structured, it's actually very interesting. The way the brisa is structured is as follows. Right? If you look at the lashon over here, it's ra'a avdo biyat uman vitaliso biyat koves. I see my talis in the hand of Reuven, or I saw my eved in the hands of Reuven. What does ra'ah mean? So hechi dami. So the Gemara says, now it's interesting, right? Because in other words, you didn't have to use that lashon of ra'ah. You could just use a lashon of haya taliso. What does it mean, ra'ah? Is sought. The Gemara says, idi edim lamali ra'ah. Neise edim v'nishkal. So if there are witnesses to this whole thing, then ultimately, again, in other words, if Rabbi say, if as you said before, that I lent with witnesses or I deposited with witnesses, then Allah said there are witnesses to the fact that I did not sell anything to anyone. Bring the witnesses and take back your object. Elalav deleka edim. Rather, it has to be that what? There aren't edim. V'chira miha tafisle. And therefore, I will say, ultimately, again, there are no edim. And therefore, when I see it, this is going back to the Reisha case, when I see it, I'm able to go ahead and take it back. Now, I will say, now, look at the Rashbam for just a moment. It's in the wide lines, the fourth line in Idi ike edim shemasalo. So if there are witnesses that I deposited this talus with Reuven, so lamali ra ha at hu de amrit lo shanu ela shemasala be'edim lo shna ra amrit de'ein uman mehemen mishum dechevan dehefkidua be'edim tzarich lahachzira be'edim va'amai katani dechiroa eino ne'eman. So also remember again, all of this is Abaye's kasha on Rabbah. So I don't understand. If there are witnesses, so Abaye is saying to Rabbah, if there are witnesses, Rabbah, you said that if you deposit the object with witnesses, then what? You have to get it back with witnesses as well. So if that's the case, why do I need this whole thing of Ra? If there are witnesses, that again, according to Rabbah, this situation should never occur because you're obligated to deposit it with witnesses, and once you deposit with witnesses, you're obligated to get it back. So look at the Rashbam, next Rashbam. V'chira osabiyada uman miyatafisle balabayis umotzio miyado alma hecha dira afilu lo masra be'edim lo mehemen uman. So Abaye says, what do you see from here? So we'll say, so Rabbah, if you were correct that you have to deposit the object with witnesses and get it back with witnesses, then there's never any need for me, the owner of the talus, to go and seize anything back, because the halacha is clearly going to be on my side. But if you look at the way this case is written, how is this case written? This case is written as, I went ahead and I deposited my talus with the uman, and then the uman goes ahead and says, you sold it to me. What's talacha, Bosai? What's talacha? I am permitted to go ahead and get my talus back, right? I'm permitted just to go ahead and grab it back, right? Why? Because uman ein lo chazaka. And I will say, now that's true even if what? Even if there is no edus. So Abaye is trying to show Rabbah, you're wrong, right? Rabbah structures these cases over here as when doesn't an uman have chazaka? We're going to say, let's go back. I'm complicating it. According to Rabbah, when do we say that an uman doesn't have chazaka? When is that? When you deposited it with witnesses, and therefore you're going to get it back with witnesses. Abaye challenges Rabbah from this brisa, because the way this brisa reads is, I deposited a talus with an uman, right? And I'm walking down the street and I say again, uman, essentially, why do you have my talus? Now I know why he has my talus because I deposited with him. He claims you sold it to me. I say, no, I didn't, and I take it back. So what do you see from here? That I could take back my talus even without what? Even without witnesses. Why? Because uman ein lo chazaka, and uman ein lo chazaka applies with or without witnesses. So this is Abaye's disproving of Rabbah. So the Gemara says, "Elalav deleka edim v'chira miatafisle." So what says Abaye says, "So now you see, uman ein lo chazaka is not a function of witnesses. It's not a function of witnesses. An uman never has the ability to go ahead and make a chazaka. Therefore, when I see the object in Reuven's possession, I have the ability to get it back." To which the Gemara says, "Lo, the olam di'ik edim." No. There are edim. I v'hu dira. And therefore, I will say again, that's the lashon ultimately again of Ra. So I will say, but here's the interesting part. But one second. Let's say if there are witnesses, then according to Rabbah, the same way you deposited the object with witnesses, the object is only considered to be returned if it was returned with witnesses as well. So as long as there is not testimony that the object has been returned, then what's the halacha? It's not returned, right? In other words, we'll say Rabbah's model, on one hand, makes it more complicated, but also makes it easier. On one hand, it's more complicated because when you deposit an object with an uman, you have to do it in front of witnesses. That makes it more complicated. On the other hand, it's less complicated. Why? Because the object is only considered to be returned if you have witnesses to that effect as well. So if there are no return witnesses, then the object is not returned. So Abaye is asking Rabbah, obviously you're wrong because look at the brisa. Look at the Brisa. If we're talking about a case of witnesses, this case doesn't get off the ground because it's very simple. If there are no return witnesses, then the object hasn't been returned. If it hasn't been returned, then it's still in the possession of the Uman who owes it back to me. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara says, so how the Gemara answers it. This is very interesting. The Gemara says, "Lo the olam the ika edim." There are witnesses in this case. I v'hodura. So I'll say if there are witnesses, that means there are witnesses that I deposited the object with Ruvain. But if there are not witnesses that he returned it, then why should he believe? As we said that he bought it from me. I, but you, Rabbi, are the one who said that if the object was deposited with Reuven with witnesses, then Reuven has an obligation to return it in the presence of witnesses as well. So Rabbi, what are you going to say to that? Rabbi will say, this is great. Amar lei hajibi. Rabbi says, I changed my mind. I changed my mind. In other words, you're right. Originally, I held that when you borrow in the presence of witnesses, you have to give it back in front of witnesses. But then comes along Rabbah and says that halacha l'maisa, I changed my mind. I changed my mind, and I hold that if you do give the object to the Uman in the presence of witnesses, ultimately, again, you don't have to return it in the presence of witnesses. Oh, okay, so that changes everything. That changes the math on this whole thing. So therefore, I will say, so let's just go full circle over here. So we don't have resolution yet, but here's what we're looking towards, right? The Mishnah told me that a Uman can't go ahead and establish a chazakah. Right? Why? What's the logic? The logic is that halacha l'maisa, because there's another legitimate reason as to why that object is in his possession. And it's not because he's the owner, it's because he was working on it for me. So Rabbah came along and said, when is that true? That he can't establish chazakah? Only when ultimately, again, I gave him the object with Eidim. Right? Because then that edus establishes that the way the object came into his possession is as an uman. But if I didn't give it to him with edim, then he can establish chazakah. Why could he establish chazakah? Because he has a migo. What's his migo? He could have said that what? I bought it from you. Right? So therefore, Rabbah says the only time an uman can't establish chazakah is when halacha l'maisa it was given with edus. Abaye disagrees. Abaye says even with edus, ultimately again you can still an uman doesn't establish chazakah because even with edus you have a migo. What's the migo? He still could say I gave it back to you. Now I will say we interpreted that to mean that Rabbah must hold that if you give it with edus, you have to return it with edus, and that's what we presupposed this entire time until we finally got to the end of it. Rabbah says, you know what, I used to hold that way, but now ultimately again I disagree. Or I retracted. Hadribi, I changed my mind, and therefore halacha l'maisa, even if you give it with eidos, ultimately again you don't have to return it with eidos. So Rabbi said that then leaves us trying to understand what exactly is the machlokes Abaye and Rabbah, and under what circumstances does an uman not establish chazakah. Does not. So Rabbi say. So I'll just tell you the way we paskin is like Abaye, that we paskin that the concept that a uman doesn't have a chazakah is just like a blanket statement. Even if I deposited the object with the uman with eidos, he still doesn't go ahead and establish a chazakah. In other words, there's no chazakah. An uman doesn't have chazakah. Now what does that mean? An uman can never acquire an object from someone? No. But what it does mean is the uman has to have definitive proof that he bought it from me or that I gifted it from him. But possession and duration is not going to be enough to establish his chazakah, because we accept this blanket concept that a uman doesn't have chazakah. I'll just mention, I mentioned this many times. I've always been very inspired by these words. Amar lei hadribi, that one phrase, right? Where Rabbah says, in this case, I changed my mind. Do you understand the godless of that? What's the godless? That Rabbah says, you know what? You could change your mind in life. So often we become so entrenched in our positions, right? And even when we recognize that they are incorrect or they're flawed, or maybe our shitas or our ideas or our concepts, right? Maybe they were good for one stage in life, but they don't work now. But we become so entrenched in certain ideas and positions and outlooks. And even when they no longer work for us, even when they're clearly not correct or not correct anymore, we refuse to budge, we refuse to yield because, hey, I built up a whole personality around this. So how could I change? How could I pivot now? If Rabbah could do it, If Rabbi could do it, so could I. The strength to say those words, these are probably the most inspirational words in all of Shas. Right, where Rabbi ultimately says, Rabbi says, what's the lashon over here again? Amrle hadribi. I changed my mind. If Rabbi could change his mind, if Rabbi could pivot in his personality, if Rabbi could go ahead and readjust the way he looks at things, or his positions, or his outlooks, or his shitas, if Rabbi could do it, then we have to find the courage to do the same. I will say, Shkoyach, what a week. A lot of Gemara, a lot of concepts. Shkoyach, a good Erev Shabbos. Schos Baruch Hashem to close out the week with all of you.